So this week, the NHS has finally banned the prescription of puberty blockers. Thank God for that. A long time coming. People have been warning about this for years, but it's taken them until now to finally do something about it. And WPATH has been completely exposed for covering up the horrendous potential consequences of these drugs being used on children. And I want to show you this clip by Douglas Murray talking on Sky News Australia, because I think he really highlights just how absurd what we were doing to kids really was.
I've said to you before, one of my rules is assume that because everybody and every age in the past did things that we are just amazed and horrified by, don't just look at what those things were in the past, but look at the things that we might be doing today that people who come after us will look at with equal bafflement and horror.
Great way for us to hold ourselves to account and really assess all the things that we're doing today. When something seems a bit off, just ask yourself, are we going to look back on this in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, hundreds of years' time, and say that was absolutely abhorrent? I really do think that we will think that about what we've been doing to kids on the gender front.
And I've said for years that one such thing is likely to be the medicalisation. One thing that our own successors will look at us with just bafflement over was that people going through childhood in our societies, in our highly developed, very, very liberal democratic societies, children going through ordinary childhood experiences of problems with their bodies, worries about their bodies, worries about their future, were being medicalized. And secondly, that they were being medicalized with consequences they were not informed about.
See, this is the thing, is consequences they were not informed about. So on the one hand, we were giving kids stuff, these horrible hormone blockers, without really knowing the long-term consequences of them. We can't know the long-term consequences of them, given that it's a fairly new phenomenon, so it's very hard to see the long-term effects. But also, with the small amounts of evidence we do have, we know that there are serious issues with these drugs. So, for example, they have been shown to make them infertile for the rest of their lives. Can you imagine that? You go through a teenage phase where you're unsure about your body, like many, many people are, and you get given these puberty blockers saying it's just a pause button, doesn't have a single side effect. And then when you grow out of that and decide that was the wrong decision later on, you then can never have kids for the rest of your life. You can't have a family. I mean, just how horrendous is that? That they would give that to kids without even telling them that that is a potential consequence.
In some cases, because the doctors knew and didn't think it was helpful to tell them, and in other cases, because the medical literature just wasn't there yet. In other words, our societies were experimenting on children with no knowledge of what would happen. Well, in recent years, we have learned from proper medical studies some of the things that can happen. You mentioned the niceness of the sounding of some of these things. It's all gender affirmation or puberty blockers, as if you just block puberty. No, the puberty blockers that many people, many children were given have made them infertile for life. In other words, they made some kind of uninformed, half-informed child decision. We don't allow children to choose to smoke or to drink alcohol or to get a tattoo, but they were allowed and sometimes encouraged to go on a pathway which had irreversible changes on their entire life.
I keep seeing more and more of these clips where you go and challenge someone and say, do you think we should give puberty blockers to 12-year-olds? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. Even if it's got some irreversible effects, yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something that at that age they're mature enough to decide. And then you say, oh, should we give 12-year-olds tattoos? And they're like, absolutely not. And then you say, okay, well, do you take back your first point? And they're like, no. And they're just so thick in the head that they can't see the huge inconsistency in their argument. There are just so many of these people around.
And so, yes, as you say, maybe it is a moment when sanity has returned.
Well, it's returned in the UK, but we've been saying on this program for some time, Douglas, Australia is fast becoming an outlier. We're blindly following this gender affirming model without any thorough investigation of the many harms identified in the UK. It's really a question, I think, here of political courage. And sadly, our supposedly conservative politicians in this country lack the backbone to push back against this ideology.
Well, whatever the causes are, we just have to look at the facts. You know, when I first wrote about this some years ago, I just decided to do it by going in and looking at the facts. What were the papers that existed? What were the studies that existed? One of the things that alarmed me very early on, as it alarmed a lot of people, principally, it has to be said, women of left and right who picked up this issue far more, I think, than some of their male counterparts, and who deserve enormous credit, and who walked through unbelievable opprobrium and insult for just doing basic things like looking at the facts. One of the things I was startled by always was that some of these procedures, some of these drugs were being administered when there was almost no knowledge about the consequences, that there were so few studies, that there was so little literature, so little information, and yet that our societies have fallen into this place where we sort of just done something I think will be looked at, as I say, as very, very wrong.
Exactly. So we are doing things to kids with barely any studies at all to see if they actually have negative consequences. We've made mistakes in the past with giving people drugs that haven't been tested properly. We had the morning sickness drug that was given to mothers and was rolled out too quickly, and then you had babies born with missing limbs, and then, yes, I will bring it up, the COVID vaccine, which wasn't tested properly, and we all thought it was great, and we're saving the old people and we're saving the NHS by apparently taking it. But then we see now that for some people this has had serious consequences that we didn't foresee because we didn't test it properly, and now we're pushing these puberty blockers on kids without knowing what it really does. And same with also other forms of medical transitioning where, you know, we're chopping kids' parts off, not necessarily here in the UK, but in places like California where stuff like this is sometimes being allowed. It's just absolutely horrendous. And you'll have these woke leftists will bring up one study and say, look, this study shows that chopping people's parts off makes them happier. But you look at these studies and it's where they've gone back and asked the person how they are feeling, like 3 months after the surgery. How about 10 years? Because we know that they feel happy in the beginning, but then further down the line when they become adults, they absolutely hate what was done to their bodies and they feel like they were abused and taken advantage of. So the evidence isn't there, and we can't have the evidence given that this is a fairly new phenomenon. So there are just not enough people to gather enough evidence and information from.
That we did it out of kindness. We did it out of a sort of let's all live together, let's all be kind, let's all be nice. But sometimes it requires so-called niceness to do a very wicked thing.
We need more tough love in society. Everything is all fluffy and nice, and often it's to someone's detriment to be too nice to them. Bring back tough love, right? If somebody is saying, oh, I'm actually a boy if they're born in a woman's body, and vice versa, maybe we should say to them, I think you might have some mental health issues that we should solve first. Hate to break it to you, but let's get you some help for that, right? If one of your friends is obese and is on the brink of having a heart attack or getting type 2 diabetes, you shouldn't say to them, oh, fat positivity, I think it's amazing that you accept yourself the way you are, I love you the way you are, you shouldn't do anything to change yourself. You're literally killing them. Tell them, help them, change themselves. Bring back tough love to society, please.
And I think that's likely to be the case in this whole area. You know, there's just a book out by one of the the forebears, one of the enablers of this whole movement, the unreadable American academic Judith Butler. She's written another book about gender, and a lot of the people who it's been torn apart by all the smarter reviewers like Sarah Dittam and various others. It's Kathleen Stock did a scorching review of it yesterday. But some of the sort of people who are still in the same movement as Judith Butler have actually said in their reviews, yes, this is going to be hard. Yes, we're going to have to push through. But yes, we have to medicalize all the children if that's what they want, because it's better than the alternative. In actual fact, the studies we have about alternatives, the studies we have about, always people have been saying things like suicide rates of minors if they're not allowed to transition. The studies we have on these sorts of things suggest that not only do suicide rates stay the same, but they actually increase after so-called attempts at transitioning. This has been a profound challenge, not just to the morality, but to the decency of our societies. And we should have approached it with care and with love, but also with our eyes open and an eye on the facts. And because of the care and love bit, a lot of people, including people in positions of extreme power, turned away from the facts, and they will have to live with that.
Exactly. So we are often being blackmailed into supporting a certain point of view on this, and also parents are being blackmailed into allowing their kids to transition and go into medical transitioning as well, because they are told this lie that your kid will kill themselves if you don't allow them to do this. And, can you imagine if you're a parent feeling that you might be responsible for your child's death? Imagine that your child kills themselves and everyone looks at you and says, it was your fault, right? You could never live down that moment. So when you tell people that's what's going to happen to them if they don't medically transition their kids, of course they're going to do it. And then those who don't have kids, people like myself who I don't have kids, but I hold the view that we shouldn't be medically transitioning children. People try to blackmail me into changing my point of view rather than actually giving me proper evidence. They make up evidence out of nowhere that doesn't exist and tell me, oh, that they're more likely to kill themselves if you don't let them medically transition. Where has that evidence come from? It's just complete and utter nonsense, because they can't actually come up with a good argument. They just have to blackmail you and shout at you and make it sound like you're a murderer who's killing trans kids. It's insane. And on that note, let's end that there. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'm Chloe Dobbs, and I'll see you again soon.